Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Nicki, how are you this morning?
Doing well, Ted. How are you?
I'm doing great. I am doing great. So I was just practicing your name, and I'm going to give it a whirl here. Nicki Kastellorizios-Lee. Did I do okay?
Absolutely. Perfection.
All right, and now you say mine.
Theodoropoulos.
That's pretty good. Mine gets butchered quite a bit. I get Theodoropoulos a lot for some reason. There's only one P, but I don't know. Just people like to throw a...
Yes, there's addition of letters, and also I get that too, like Kastellorizios. I'm like, well, I'm switching a couple syllables, but I'll give you the credit for making the attempt. It's cool. So.
Right. Well, good stuff. I appreciate you coming on the show. You and I had some conversations about communications in legal, and as you know, InfoDash is an intranet, extranet platform. On the intranet side, we're all about communications, and we facilitate communications internally. So I thought there were some great topics for us to kind of kick around. And before we get into the topics, though, you've got quite a long background in this sort of stuff. It looks like you started off as a legal assistant, and then you were docketing in big law, doing some business systems analysis, and now you're at Perkins Coie. Why don't you tell us what you're doing today and a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. I'm happy to share it because I think it's very relatable. I think if you're working in legal or have been in the legal industry for a while, you've probably had a bit of a meandering path through a lot of different roles. And it's a tight-knit community. You kind of know a lot of the same faces and people as you navigate through those different positions in your career journey. But it's one of those things where I did try to break out of legal after a number of years, and I went into the financial services industry. In fact, I was doing business systems analysis work at a major bank, and I thought it was really where I was going to test my chops, right? And see how, my BA skills stacked up and how things are done in different industries. And while there were, I would say there was more structure and more process in place that supported like project delivery, it was almost also too formal. And it got to a point where, you come from legal, you're used to wearing a lot of hats or switching around or helping each other out in different parts of a project. And it was pretty narrow. It was like, well, this is what you do here, and this is what they do here. And, it was very much passing the work down the chain. Probably pretty efficient, but also lacks some of that, the camaraderie and sort of the building of culture around initiatives. So I really started to miss legal. And so I saw this opportunity to come and do technology writing at Perkins. And I was very excited because it's a unique intersect for me. I love to write and I really love technology. I consider myself a pretty innovative person. In other words, I like to adapt change pretty quickly, not without some reservation, but I'm pretty eager to jump in with both feet. And I thought, what an awesome opportunity to write about things I really care about and make it exciting for other people, because we know that techno mumbo jumbo can be pretty baffling and pretty annoying for people to have to read. And so it's like the only thing worse than corporate gobbledygook is corporate technology gobbledygook, I think, in my opinion. So for me, I was like, this is going to be an interesting task. Like, how do I write technology messages to a wide audience, to a diverse and broad audience in terms of technical expertise and dexterity, desire, and how do I make things get across? Because with technology, as you know, it's almost always asking you to change something about your current way of doing things, your current toolkit, your process. So I'm asking you to change. How do I get you to get engaged and want to do it? So it's never ending challenge.
Well, in addition to the writing that you do, you also have an internal facing podcast at
That's right.
Perkins, which I thought was super interesting. I'm a big believer in well, not just podcasting, obviously I host one, but just video as a medium of communications. I think that there's significant value both from the person communicating the message and the person receiving the message. It's quicker, it's more effective. You get more information, right? You get visual information instead of just maybe audio or audio only, or just the written word. You get expression and both verbally, facial expressions, hand expressions. So I'm curious. I want to learn a little bit more about that. I think it's interesting, and I'm surprised more firms aren't doing it. So how did it get started?
I'm so glad you brought this up because I was very excited about trying out something new because, like you said, not everyone is doing something like this. And we get into, when we think about the digital age and everything, most of things, if not everything in our lives it's highly virtualized. It's what I call hyper-virtualized. We do a lot of things on screen. We're reading on screen, we're interacting on screen, we're learning on screen. And of course, for most of us desk workers, we're working all day on screen. So when we're thinking about how we process information, it's gotten to be a drain, right? We know about information overload and the challenges we face with reaching tired readers, right? And even someone who may really care about what's coming across their inbox, but finding sort of the bandwidth and the space to give it the time it needs. And as in the case of tech comms, and you got to prepare yourself to make a change about something. And you're like, oh my gosh, not another thing for me to process. So I thought, why not use another medium? And to your point, we have other ways of communicating that I think are underutilized in many organizations. And the podcast is unique in that although you can add video, I think the audio experience is another sort of underused way of engaging when we do so much visually with the screen environment, right? So I thought, let's think about a way to take a tougher topic and give it its own channel. And that topic is the adoption of agile, capital A agile methodology. And we're doing a lot of that at the firm. And we've got teams that are pretty much fully agile. We have some that are doing a bit of a hybrid or custom experience, but the idea of prioritizing work in a different way, getting that transparency and sprint timing around efforts, that's a lot of that is a really new concept for people, even though agile methodology has been around for a while. I don't know that every role or vertical has thought about applying it in a modern workforce, but it makes sense for the modern workforce, right? Because we do things in time segments and we deliver things more efficiently and we can actually measure outcomes. And that's so important, right? So I thought, how can I get this message across to sort of the general technical person who maybe never saw themselves doing agile, even in my role as a communication, as a technology trainer. We think of engineers, but what about all those other roles that bring innovation to life in an organization? How do we get them to be interested in this agile practice and make it their own so they can be more efficient? So I thought, let's talk about it. Maybe that helps. And one of the things that we did with that effort was we made sure that we were talking to our peers, right? So this is not like there's only one host and they're monologuing down. It's like, let's bring in the people who have been pretty seasoned at agile methodology and let them talk about it peer to peer. And it makes for a more interesting conversation. I think it makes it more relatable. They bring up great examples, which help people click with the content. So I think that was sort of my experiment. Let's see if we can drive adoption of agile beyond written word, beyond a communication, and put it in a social conversational environment and see how it does.
Interesting. And it sounds like this is directed towards maybe your PMO or your internal technical team. Who's the audience for this?
That's right. So right now it is internal to the technology department, and yes, the PMO, engineering groups, like I said, the education groups, library, everybody who's in our technology vertical, so to speak, is the audience. So you can think about the wide array of listeners and the way they might be thinking about agile methodology and where it fits with the way they work, or better yet, how they could innovate to change the way they work to a more modern model.
And then what is the format, like length, distribution mechanism? How are you measuring analytics? What does all that look like?
Yeah, so I use a platform like the one we're using today, and it makes it pretty easy. I'm the producer. I would never say I'm like a podcasting pro. I think you probably are by now, Ted, but I just get out there and I do an intro and an outro, and I try to frame each episode with the unique details. Today we're talking with, and they're all people right? So that I think makes it more interesting. And then you get the listener drawn in, and I keep them pretty short. I mean, I had a pretty strict rule of 10 minutes with a 15, like up to 15-minute overflow, because I never want to stop, natural conversation or things that are kind of taking off and very interesting. But I wanted people to go into this thinking like, hey, you've got a mixed audience. Their attention is already taxed. Last thing we want to do is overwhelm. So let's give them something in a really short and sweet format. And we've seen pretty good response to these episodes so far. I would say about half of the department is tuned in. I would, of course, love more, but I think it's one of those things that also requires a little adoption. So maybe as the episodes go forward, we see increased listenership.
Yeah, I mean, it takes time to build an audience. I mean, we've been doing this almost a year. I actually started recording episodes over a year ago, but right before ILTA, we released our first 3. And there's a lot of strategy to like the themes that you talk about and how to pull out clips and publicize those. This is an external audience that we're dealing with, a little different in your realm. But, what about practice of law use cases? So like, I'm thinking there's so much knowledge and expertise in lawyers' heads that could benefit other folks within the practice and maybe even beyond their own particular practice. Like, is this a testing ground for something that might go more broadly? What does that picture look like?
That is my hope, right? I mean, we're sort of testing the waters and giving it a full run with a friendly audience and with an audience that I think needs to tune in. And we have a lot of support from leadership for people to tune in. So hopefully that's also driving interest. But I think that ideally these topics could transcend and permeate other parts of the operations of the firm. And I think with practice groups, I think, this particular topic may not be of particular interest to them, but the idea that this is another channel, it's another way to disseminate important information, and you can do it pretty quickly, and you can just sort of rattle off what's on your mind. And I think that's important because we tend to think that it has to be formalized or written up or highly academic or whatever. But I think we learn so much from each other, like almost with osmosis, as information kind of permeates around. I think this is a great way to do it. And I also think the flexibility is key, right? We're thinking about the modern professional in a professional services firm. They've got so much flying at them professionally. And of course, they've got the personal lives to integrate. And there's just a ton to process. So this is one of those media that actually you can do in tandem with something else. So you can be on a walk and listen. You can have it tuned in and be working simultaneously. So I think it creates that flexibility, and that draws people in too. So it's a great way, I think, for practice groups to start sharing information. It's just another way to do it outside of email.
Yeah. Interesting, a little bit off topic, but one of the most productive ways that I have learned to use AI is in the preparation of these podcasts. And how I do it is we do a planning call. You and I did one. I do them pretty much for every episode. I don't know that I've ever recorded one without that. And that's just basically to talk about what we're going to talk about and, align themes. I want to make sure that the topics that we discuss on the podcast are aligned to the interest of our target audience, which is knowledge management, and innovation, and legal. And what I used to do is those planning calls, I used to go back, I record them, and I'd go back and I'd listen to them, and I'd build out the agenda from that. So then I was like, man, this is a lot of work. So then I started to try to do it during the call, and I would, take notes. And now what I do is I download the transcript I use Fireflies, but any Zoom does it too. And then I upload that in. I like Claude a little bit better than ChatGPT, but ChatGPT works fine. And then I upload the transcript, and then I ask it for a 3-topic agenda with 4 sub bullets each, and it does a damn good job. So between that and my notes, I've saved myself. I used to spend probably an hour on every episode. Now I spend the 30-minute call in 5 minutes just tweaking what Claude spits out for the agenda.
Right.
So I'm sure over time you're going to learn lots of ways to become more efficient too. And then what about like client-facing podcasts? Like, is that that seems like there would be opportunities there. I don't know what that would look like, but have you guys thought anything about that?
I really haven't spent a lot of time on that. I figured that would be a later phase to see the success of how we can deploy something internally with a local group and then even expand it further. And then again, when you think about the external audience, that is a different group of people. And so I think we'd want to engage marketing and think about how we could align podcast content with the way they approach their external communications and the strategies that they use. So, I mean, I'm sure there are lawyers out there doing podcasts right now, right? I mean, for different reasons and different channels, and marketing has like guidelines for them and, all that. But as far as taking something that we develop inside the firm that a client could use or tune into, that's something that, I think is something to look forward to.
Yeah. I was thinking too, again, just it wouldn't necessarily be podcast type of format, but InfoDash is an intranet, extranet platform. And I'm thinking on the extranet side, how keeping clients abreast of, things related to a particular area of law, because it's the new, marketing model out there is really content driven. There was a big push I think it was called there was a book, Predictable Revenue, Predictable Profits, came out in the late 2000s. And the model is, sending out emails, having a SDR, sales development representative, somebody junior, making contact with potential prospects and trying to personalize the message, get appointments and demos. I'm talking about from a software company perspective. And that model is pretty much dead because marketers have completely ruined the email channel. There's so much communication coming at people that they've had to put up walls, and it's really difficult to get emails through. So our strategy is, you know what? We've been operating in this space for many, many years, 16 years. We know there's a lot we know that our clients want to know, and what's a way for us to, rather than hitting them with sales messages, deliver them some value in some way. And you know what, we'll stay top of mind, so when they do have a need, they'll think about us. So it would seem that there would be similar opportunities in the world of law, but I'm not close enough to the marketing and biz dev processes to know if that's accurate or not.
No, that's a really good insight. And I think another area where, that could be really, I think it would be appreciated might be things like generative AI updates, right? Like what are the continuing evolutions of laws around it, client appetite for it, how to speak with clients about how you're using it, when you're using it. I wonder if that topic would be one of those things that's best communicated that way, because you can keep it current, right? You can have another discussion about it.
Yeah. And, I just had Travis Rosen from Baker Hostetler on the podcast, and he's actually with Incubator, which is the incubator non-practice of law subsidiary at Baker Hostetler. And they did something really interesting. They actually won ILTA's Transformative Project of the Year for it. Yeah. So what they do is they have a practice area that helps companies with litigation around pixels. So a lot of firms have pixels on their site that collect information, and there's a technical angle to this too. So people would come, hey, I'm getting sued because I have a pixel that violates GDPR or whatever. And so they spun off this group within their subsidiary that goes in and actually does the technical work. Like, yeah, you do have pixels, and now they can be proactive. So with their clients, they can say, hey, look, avoid this litigation but there's so much like knowledge sharing that could take place. Like, I didn't even know I'd heard of a pixel. I didn't know what it was before the podcast, and cookie banners and all that sort of stuff. Like, what an opportunity to get out and educate your potential audience about a topic where you provide a service.
That's right.
Yep. Seems like a great opportunity. Well, let's shift gears a little bit. One thing I wanted to talk to you guys about, InfoDash is built on SharePoint Online. We integrate very tightly with Microsoft Teams, and we're seeing like it in legal, we sell primarily into the AmLaw 200. Really, it's law firms with 100 attorneys and up. So that's really kind of like the NLJ 350. But we're seeing firms adopt Teams, but they're really using the most basic use cases like chat, presence. So, you can see if somebody's red, yellow, or green when you're in Outlook. Are they in a meeting? Are they idle? Or are they available? And then online meetings. I'm not seeing a whole lot. There's exceptions to this, but I feel like we're still early in the Teams adoption realm within big law. How is Teams being used at Perkins? And if so, how are they using those three use cases primarily?
So it's a big question. I think I'll start by saying that you mentioned email earlier, right? And it gets overused. And it is still, though, probably the most comfortable place for law firm professionals to work. I would say mainly lawyers, where they're communicating all day, they're sending documents back and forth, they're scheduling calls, they're having those meetings and conversations. Some of it's all over email. And so on the one hand, we recognize, because we've got the feedback, that email is too much. On the other hand, it's also where they want to be, or where they are, and perhaps that's why they want it. But whatever the case might be, I think there's a little bit of a paradigm shift with using Teams that takes you into a new place. And yes, it's built to be a one-stop shop, right? I mean, you can post, you can communicate in real time, you can do async, sync, you can even integrate or bring Outlook into the environment. You can have external websites, you can do matter work, right? If you've got DMS integrations, you can do that. You can do all that. I think it's almost like stopping for a moment to change the proverbial square tires to the circular ones that we've seen in that like caveman cartoon. Like, you do have to stop to get the efficiency, or stop for a moment to see the benefit. And I think that is a challenge for all modern workers, but definitely for lawyers and business professionals in the law firm environment. It's just the nature and the culture of our industry. So I think to answer your question, we are using Teams. We do have sort of two different ways of approaching its environment. We look at it from an operational, business professional use case, and then more of a legal. And when we say legal, we just really mean the lawyers and paralegals and other billable timekeepers, the way they work. And so we have launched Teams beyond meetings, and we are encouraging people to look at spaces and how to make that one-stop shop scenario work for your unique practice or your unique operation. And we have seen some adoption, but yeah, I would say it's early, and it's going to take people making a bit of a cognitive switch from an older way of working to a newer way of working. And I think once you're there, you see the value, and it's like, wow, this is so great. All the files are right here. There's a chat right here with my team. I can spin up an on-the-fly meeting with my team right within the same frame. I mean, it's obvious that there are advantages. And I do remain hopeful that adoption will continue to grow. But yeah, I would say it's low and slow. It's early.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, to your point about email being comfortable, I mean, that's where lawyers live. Lawyers live in Outlook, Word, Acrobat. Like there's a handful of applications where they spend the vast majority of their time. And, they're not always the most tech savvy. There's obviously exceptions to that. But I think on a whole, your whole right hemisphere, left hemisphere, language and arts, and, the other one being music, technology, logic, those sorts of things. And there are plenty of people who bridge that gap really well. But
Sure.
Those two things, those two skill sets are sometimes mutually exclusive. It just seems like it's going to be legal is going to be a slower adopter than most with teams. And I guess that's, for comms professionals that work in legal like you, like what are the implications of that? Will clients, I mean, we think that we are putting our chips on the table that teams will be the preferred mechanism through which law firms share information with clients.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is because teams using shared channels is the most frictionless way today that there is to do that. There are some caveats, like in order to use shared channels, both the law firm and the client have to flip a few switches behind the scenes for, I think it's called B2B Direct Connect or something. Mm-hmm. But once that happens, it's very easy for firms to share content from their team's tenant to their client's team's tenant natively. So there's no tenant switching. There's no separate URL. There's no separate set of credentials. There's no separate user interface. Like today with HiQ, none of that is true. Everybody creates their own customizations around HiQ, and it's always a separate URL. It's usually a separate set of credentials. So if I'm an inside counsel with 40 panel firms, which isn't unusual, right? For a big company, I got 40 different places I have to go find info on my matters. That's insanity. So I don't know. Do you think there's opportunities there from your comms perspective?
Of course. And I mean, I think in terms of communicating internally, like internal comms to this busy group who's managing all that workload, right? I think there are great opportunities within the team's environment, right? I mean, we know that when you post something, you can get an alert. You can have notifications pop up. And sometimes, some messaging is really fit for that, right? I mean, it's like letting someone know, hey, maybe, your computer's going to reboot at the end of the day and you're doing an update. I mean, is that better as an email or is it better as a notification? And, you kind of get it close to the change. So you say, okay, I know that's coming. And so we think about the way people engage with information, and there's just untapped potential in environments like Teams, and especially for internal comms. It's just like you can take some of it out of email and create posts, create notifications. I mean, yeah, I'm excited to see where this can go. I mean,
yeah, I agree. Yeah, and we're putting big bets on that it's going to be the wave of the future. It's email is not going away anytime soon, but it really has to stop being the catch-all. And really, if you think about the stuff that we're doing at InfoDash, it is really to help facilitate that. So intranet started, the earliest usage of the term I found was like in 1994, which is shortly after the web browser was, really popularized, right? That was maybe 92 with Mosaic. And so intranets have been around for a long time, and their main purpose, and we're doing things more broadly than just intranets. We're really a digital workplace platform, but intranets started as mechanisms for organizations to communicate with employees and keep important communications front and center for a period of time, email has a very short life cycle, right? You don't typically keep emails pinned in your inbox that are communications from your company. That wouldn't be efficient to do that. But having a homepage of an intranet where, as an employer, I can say, hey, annual enrollment, every time you go there, it's a reminder to go do it, or you're out of billing your time entry compliance, right? Or you've got your accounts receivable for your top 5 firms or 45 days past due. You need to having that intranets as a way to deliver that is very valuable. So we're always thinking about okay, how can we take communications out of email? And I think Teams is going to be a big part of that equation.
I agree. And I think the news feed, like you mentioned, in a sense, is really important because then you don't have to hit the inbox with the message, right? I mean, and there's a lot of ways to approach this, right? We know that adults, I guess their attention span is just a matter of seconds, right? And we know that, like you said, email, as it moves down, it becomes harder and harder to find, and it sort of falls off your radar. And we also know that from change management practices that people want to see things maybe at least 6 or 7 times before it really clicks with them. So sending one email and then expecting them to get, like you said, something out of it or the action driven, it's not going to work. And you can't keep sending the email because then you become spam, right? So it's how do you make those other touch points, right, within the org? And I think a solid intranet, a news feed for certain types of messaging, pop-ups for certain types of messaging, posting and chatting for other types of messaging. There's a lot of opportunity. A lot of it's in Teams, a lot of it's in other places, but I think that is really the future. We talk about omni-channel communication, right? I mean, it goes beyond multi-channel. We know we have a lot of channels and we know have to reach people a lot of ways, but omni-channel is essentially saying, give it to them in a variety of ways and see with data where they respond. Do they love the pop-up notifications? Do they delete the email straight away? I mean, there's systems that can measure that kind of thing. So that's where it's at. It's got to be this blend of timeliness, like async, sync, pop-ups, emails, just to get people thinking about where they're going to find their information and behaviorally decide what their preferences are.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think findability is a real challenge in email, and tools like intranets and digital workplace platforms really help with that. Well, we talked about audio, video. What about just writing? I mean, writing as a comms professional in a law firm has to be a big part of your job. When you and I first connected, you had mentioned about writing for the modern reader, and what managing topic complexity in writing. How do you go about doing that, and what does that look like in your day to day?
Yeah, so it's an ongoing challenge. I find it to be actually kind of fun, but it does frustrate me at times because sometimes you think you've got the equation just right, and then you see something kind of fall flat, and you think, oh, okay, read that one wrong. But the idea of the modern reader, the way I define it, is it's who we are right now. It is the reader living in the digital age. It is the reader of the 4th industrial going into the 5th industrial revolution. Information. It's the information age. Information is everywhere. And so there's this level of discernibility that has to happen for the reader. They have to stop and say, what is going to get my time and attention today? Because you can't possibly take it all in, and nor should you, right? We know that's not healthy. And we know that the human mind and human spirit has natural limitations. And so when we talk about the attention span being short, I think that's just a byproduct of being in the information age. We have to sort of reposition constantly. And so we have learned to spend less time on some things. And we make judgments, I think, about what is worth a read. And this is something I'm kind of dubbing as read worthiness. And I think of it as Similar to when you judge an aircraft, if it's ready for flight, is it airworthy? I mean, that's the idea. Is something that you're writing read worthy? And how do you reach everybody? Well, you can't, right? You're always going to have, of your 100 people, you've got your percentages. The 10% going to read you every time. The other 10% never going to look ever, no matter what you're saying. And you got the 80% in the middle who's like, hey, I'm willing to bring you into the read worthiness equation. Are you read worthy, right? I think that's what people generally do. Like, what's going to take their time that day? And when you write about technology and the complexity of organizational change and things that require people to gear up yet again and make a shift in the way they do things, how they work, I mean, you're not only asking them to read, you're asking them to adopt something new. You're asking them to do something different. All of that takes energy, right? And so we're limited. And Axios came out with a really interesting communication stat that said, when you're determined, what I'll say is read worthy, you only get 26 seconds with that reader. So you still better be on point. And so the other side of read worthiness, I think, besides being concise and saying what you mean, is actually meaning what you say. And so it's choosing your words really carefully and giving them, if they only are going to stay with you for 26 seconds, do they get what you need for them to get out of it? And I think that's the ongoing challenge. So it's a reduction in, techno lingo. It's really trying to tell a good story. I always think of the 5 W's, standard, going back to journalism stuff, right? And making sure your nut graph is prominent, right? They only read the first few lines. They at least could make a judgment about whether they wanted to continue reading, or maybe they got just what they needed, right? And that's also honoring the limited attention span of the modern reader. It's like, okay, hey, I told you what you need to know. Everything else is up to you. You want to go on? Go on. Otherwise, you got what you needed. And I think that creates the trust, the credibility to return to your channel, to your comms, so that you continue to grow your readership and stay read worthy. So it's really challenging. I know that there's some significant research that talks about the way we read on screen is different than we read on a page. It's like the F pattern, and you probably have done it yourself. I know I'm like, I've done that. You start with 2 horizontal lines. The first one is longer than the second one, and then you kind of jump down and do it again. And that's how we read on screen. So again, thinking about the format of your communications, the content, saying what you mean, exactly what you mean. Those are the ways to reach the busy modern reader, the busy lawyer, the busy law firm professional. I mean, it's like we've got to weed out what we really don't need. And that's making it challenging for writers. So writers have to be meeting people where they are.
I'm surprised that it's as long as 26 seconds. Like that seems a little longer. Like you think about all of the pressures that are put on attention spans. Like, for example, a LinkedIn post, I think it's the first 200 characters before the read more link. Like if you don't grab readers' attention with that, the rest of it never gets read. Right. So, and it's not just LinkedIn, X, whatever the tweet limit is. I'm not active on the platform, so I don't know. But, and then, there's also some pressures in the opposite direction. Like what you're talking about is writing, high quality communications. There's so much garbage online where they bury the lead and they're just enticing you to scroll, real catchy headline. And then they wait till you're 3/4 down the page before they actually reveal what it is the reason that you've clicked the link. So, there's lots of pressure on that. You had mentioned when we talked last, you talked about like how to insert empathy into the writing. Like how does that work?
Yeah, so I think that goes to the modern writer meeting the modern reader where they are, right? And that's, like I said, that's all of us. We are all the readers today, and we are even all writing today, wherever it might be, social media, at work, for fun, whatever. The written word is important. We know that. And we know it, like I said, there's a certain measure, like you can give it a science, right? Like, hey, try to be short, keep it under this many words or this many seconds. But there's also an art to it. I think part of the art comes from the humanity of it. I mean, I always talk about keeping IT human. Otherwise, if IT is not serving people, it's not valuable, right? It's for us to enjoy and to benefit from it. So by the same token, when you write about it, you've got to give it that sort of ethos. Like that has to come through. But I think a lot of that comes from empathy, and I go as far as to suggest, and I'm happy to discuss, that if you're not writing with empathy, in other words, if you're not putting yourself on the other side of your message as the reader and thinking about not only how you came away from it, but also were you able to apply a readworthiness measure to it? Because that's what people are probably doing. Are you ethical? I mean, when you understand the way people work today, and you understand that people, feel overloaded, feel burdened by information, they're trying to sift through every day. If you empathize with that, you should really want to try and solve for that. And the way you solve for that is making sure the empathy is in your work. In other words, write it for, not for the writer, right? Because that's a mistake writers make, right? Like, I want to just hear myself say these beautiful words. Write for the reader, advocate for them, show the empathy by advocating and putting yourself on the reader side of things and saying like, okay, if I read this, do I walk away with a clear action? Do I walk away with a good feeling? That's the part that I think is it's an ethical imperative, I think, for writers today, if they want their stuff to be read. If you don't want your stuff to be read, that's a whole different thing.
Yeah. What's the point of writing if you don't want anybody to read it? Yeah. So, well, hey, this has been great. I know we're running out of time, but yeah, I love what you guys are doing at Perkins with the internal podcasting stuff. I think there's a lot of other areas of opportunity that maybe our listeners can, capitalize on. And I think it's, we're seeing this more and more, the whole podcasting medium gain traction. I mean, this has been underway for a long time, but in the vendor space, it's a great way for us to deliver value to the audience, like I said, and stay visible. But all those things hold true internally as well. So we wish you continued success with that. And if you guys ever do anything external, we'll certainly keep our eyes on it. And yeah, we'd love to hear more success stories coming from the work that you're doing there at Perkins.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for having me. This has been a great conversation.
Good stuff. Okay. Well, thanks for coming, and I'm sure we'll chat again soon.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Nicki. Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content. Want to dive deeper into the world of legal innovation? Connect with us online at getinfo-.com, where you'll find additional resources and articles. You can also follow us on social media at getinfo- to stay updated on the latest news and insights in the field of legal tech and knowledge management. Once again, thank you for joining us today on Legal Innovation Spotlight, a fireside chat series hosted by Info-.